So the TikTok CEO was testifying before Congress today. I want to play some of it for you because you got to see it. There were some crazy fireworks, and then we'll come back later and chat about it.
Wall Street Journal reported that China will firmly oppose any forced sale or divestiture of TikTok. And this is based not on conjecture, but it's based on comments provided by the official spokesperson at the Ministry of Commerce, who said that any TikTok sale or spinoff would amount to a technology export and would have to adhere to Chinese law and approval. This spokesperson was quoted as saying that Chinese, and I quote, the Chinese government will make decisions according to the law. The Chinese government. Mr. Chu, do you agree with this official? Yes or no?
Congressman, I cannot speak on behalf of a Chinese government official.
Do you agree with that official?
We will need to look at this because Project Texas is designed to move forward here in the United States, and we are not discussing this, so I don't have specifics.
You know, your company is valued at upwards of $50 billion and has been on the verge of forced sale or ban for 3 years at least, correct? Do you expect this committee to believe you haven't already discussed this scenario with your team? And you should have an answer to this, yes or no, I agree with the Communist Party, or I don't agree with the Communist Party. So, I guess I would say at that point, you disagree with the Communist Party. Explain your discrepancy.
Congressman, for 2 years, we spent $1.5 billion US to build Project Texas. This is after very extensive discussions with relevant folks.
Project Texas is just something expanded for the future. We're talking about now. We're talking about what you're doing now, what your expectations are now, what your relationship is with the Communist Party, which is our major concern of what the impact that will be with a country. Let me rephrase that. With a Communist Party that doesn't care about America and sees us as standing in their way for superpower. That's our concern, and for you to have direct relationship, direct ownership with ByteDance, and to not have a characterization or an agreement or disagreement that you say explicitly with this party policy, it's hard for us to believe what you're saying. Let me move on.
Mr. Chu, as CEO of TikTok, why have you not directed your engineers to change this source code?
Congressman, thank you for the question.
Have you directed them to change the source code?
Like what we are offering and
Yes
my fourth commitment?
Have you directed them to change that source code?
Congressman, if you give me a bit of time to just
No,
explain
I don't. It's a yes or no question. Have you directed your engineers to change that source code?
I'm not sure I understand.
Why are you allowing TikTok to continue to have the capacity for censorship, and yet you claim here that you don't? Let me remind you of something. Do you realize that making false and misleading statements to Congress is a federal crime?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So have you directed your engineers to change that source code?
I am giving third-party access monitoring by experts. And Congressman, you are an expert on this. You could agree with me that no other company does this.
source code is the same as Doan?
Mr. Chu, please. Your technology is literally leading to death. Mr. Chu, yes or no? Do you have full responsibility for your algorithms used by TikTok to prioritize content to its users? Yes or no, please?
Congressman, I'll just like to, if respectfully, if you don't mind, I would just like to start by saying it's devastating to hear about the news of, as a father myself, this is tragic.
Yes or no? I'll repeat the question. Do you have full responsibility over the algorithms used by TikTok to prioritize content to its users? Yes or no, please?
Congressman, we do take these issues very seriously.
Yes or no?
And we do provide resources for anyone who types in anything that
Sir,
is suicide
yes or
related.
no? I see you're not willing to answer the question or take any responsibility for your parents' companies, the technology, and the harms it creates. It's just very, very sad. Very sad.
It's very sad.
This is why Congress needs to enact a comprehensive privacy and data security law to give Americans more control over their information and to protect our children. We must save our children from big tech companies like yours who continue to abuse and manipulate them for your own gain.
Has TikTok at any time provided the Chinese government with either precise GSP information collected from U.S. users or inferences made from that data?
That I can give you a straight no.
Mr. Chu, even if Congress were to ban TikTok, I'm concerned that China or others would still have access to U.S. consumer data by purchasing it through data brokers. Will you commit not to sell any of TikTok's data to data brokers now or in the future?
We do not do that. We do not sell data to data brokers now.
Will you commit to not do it in the future?
There are certain members of our industry who do this. I think this has to be broad legislation to help us, the whole industry, address this problem.
It was about 5 hours. It was really long. And in fact, it was really interesting because usually congressional hearings aren't like this. One of the things that really stood out is that it was definitely bipartisan. Both Republicans and Democrats were like asking this guy, hey, tell me an answer, yes or no, tell me an answer, yes or no. And when he refused, they would just like keep grilling him, which is really crazy. The other thing too, which I thought was interesting is that anytime they asked him about something with the Chinese government, do you have an opinion about the government? What do you think about the government's policy in regards to this, XXX? He would basically try to evade. And I get that, right? If your bosses are the Chinese Communist Party, you don't really want to piss anybody off. And to be fair, though, which I do think was quite interesting, he was trying to be nice to the Americans and as well as to the Chinese at the same time. So he's kind of trying to play that middle ground. However, we'll see. One thing that seems clear to me, it seemed like much of the politicians / government were really, really strong against China. So we'll see if there is a ban coming. Some of the stuff that I was thinking about when I was watching this, I'm going to share some thoughts with you is, I'll pose this to you, is do you think we should regulate social media in regards to children and how much they look at this stuff? Because I'll give you an example, not just how much and what stuff they look at. I'll give you examples. Say, take a look at something like movies. So I'm fine with regulations on movies. Example, we have ratings on movies, right? You have like your PG, you have your G, PG-13, R, and NC-17, et cetera, right? So basically, based on your age, we determine whether or not you can see a movie. And also, too, another one I think is an interesting one is, what do you guys think about screen time? So, for example, should we pass a law that says, you know what, children can only have, 5 hours of screen time of social media? You can make the case, I understand, you can make the case to say, no, Chris, I believe in freedom all day, every day, and children, if they want to look at TikTok 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and their parents are cool with that, so be it, right? And I think that's an interesting question of how do we regulate things for children? Like I mentioned the one with movies, and I'm also talking about social media. These are the kind of things that like we didn't have problems necessarily when I was a kid. Because like, for example, when I was a kid, everyone was all about MTV, but there'd be like a point at night where like regular programming would just shut off and it would just go into infomercials, these kind of things, like this idea of this sort of 24 news hour in your hand that you can watch it in bed is something that we need to talk about. Do we want children to have access to this 24/7? And I'd be curious you guys to answer that. Now, I already know in place that there are parental controls on much of, internet, these kind of things. And so certainly parents can decide that for themselves, but, should the government do that? So I'm posing this question to you. I was a professor for about 10 years, so obviously I kind of, I'll say obviously, but I kind of tend to be more on regulation. But I'll give you an example for me. So my point of view may be different than yours. I'm fine with something like a school uniforms, totally fine. I think that removes a lot of pressure from kids. Essentially, all kids are wearing the same thing. And yes, there still can be, sort of comparisons among uniforms, when kids, one person has a nicer sweater than the other, but they're all freaking wearing the same sweater. However, I get it. There are many Americans out there say, no, Chris, we want freedom all day, every day, wear whatever I want, watch TikTok as much as I want, so be it, right? And I'm just saying these are different points of view on this kind of thing. The other issues as well, which are regarding TikTok, would it be banned? Is it controlled by the Chinese government? Are they collecting data? So it seemed like in the last one I showed you guys that he was kind of saying, no, we're not sharing location data with the Chinese government. I thought that was interesting because that was one of the sticking points. And he answered that one very clearly. And that was the only ones that he answered really clearly. So I felt like he was really sort of like had clear answers in other ones. And other times he would say, I'll get back to you. So who knows on these kind of things, because I don't necessarily, I'm just being honest, I don't necessarily think that everything he said is 100% true, because who knows? Because there could be issues as well to where like the way you answer questions and things like this is that he'll say, well, I believe this, I believe that. But it doesn't necessarily mean it is happening or not happening, because if the code is indeed, say, controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, or say members of the party that are inside the company that can, access stuff whenever they want, it doesn't necessarily mean that the CEO knows everything, right? Do you guys see what I'm saying right there? So we'll see. The other thing too, which people have wrote in comments, and I understand this one as well, I just want to mention to you, there certainly is the case that you could say, Meta, Google, which would be like YouTube, what we're on right now, or Snapchat, these kind of things. American companies are pressuring politicians to put the ban on TikTok because it's taking away from, American companies. And you could make that case. Like this could all be for show, and it's just to push the interests of American companies. It could be. The case against TikTok, which I mentioned to you guys before on the channel, is that there was reports coming out that TikTok is tracking the location of journalists, which is a big thing, because essentially what this means is that basically, like, if there's any sort of leaking information from the government or a Chinese business, these kind of stuff, then they can kind of see who's meeting with who. We talked about this before on the channel. Someone wrote in the comments, like, if many young military members of the U.S. military, that is, are using TikTok, then the Chinese government would know like exactly where our military personnel are. Just think about that, like the sort of ramifications of this kind of stuff. So the whole GPS stuff it matters. Whether or not children are, using this too much, or are children watching, things that they shouldn't be, or watching things that they shouldn't be too much, due to the algorithm. This is a thing. And, one of the things that I think is so important to understanding social media is that when people are indeed addicted to it and are watching certain kinds of content, it can really be damaging to your self-esteem. So I'll just give you a simple example. If you go on YouTube or say TikTok, and you see that your favorite influencer is driving a Lambo all day, every day, you're just like, oh my God, why don't I have a Lambo? I'm a loser. These kind of things, like you just feel kind of bad. Or this is a real thing, say for like young girls, they turn on TikTok and they're comparing themselves to women who are like in their 20s, and the young girl be like, oh, why don't I have breasts like that person? Why don't I have clothes like that person? Why don't I go out to dinner like this person? Like they constantly comparing yourself to other people is one of the things that is very damaging on social media. And so sometimes you need to take yourself back, because this is also very real. You just don't know who is like a pretender or not a pretender on social media. You don't know. You don't know if like, the person driving around the Lambo really owns that Lambo. They could just rent it for the day and say, hey, this is my Lambo, buy my course, that kind of stuff. You don't know. This is part of social media. So I'm talking about multiple things at the same time, the influence of the Chinese government, and also to the ramification on children. But I do think all of these things are related, because essentially we're talking about protecting people, right, overall. And part of the sticking point of the one part where the guy was talking about the algorithm and the TikTok, with the TikTok CEO, was basically saying that children are watching these things about like, how to hurt yourself, this kind of stuff, or how to do drugs, these kind of things. And I think these are real things. And like, does TikTok have control over the algorithm? Because from the point of view of social media, the issue could be, well, I don't care what kids are watching. I just want them to keep watching and watching and watching and watching. And if the most, exciting content on, say, these kind of platforms is, eating soap and this kind of stuff, because that was a real thing that people used to do on these things. Like, it's like, oh my God, what are we doing? And you have to remember, YouTube was started banning this kind of content. And the question is, if TikTok is controlled by, say, the Chinese government, and the Chinese government wants, all American children to be basically idiots, they won't necessarily regulate like we would want them to. So anyway, that's some thoughts on this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether or not you think TikTok should be banned, and some of the questions that I posed to you regarding social media. So please share your thoughts. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.